right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Build a Mind podcast. I'm your host, Trevor, and today we don't have Will with us because he's preoccupied with some other stuff, but that's perfectly fine. We're going to get on with it. We have a very interesting guest, and I know I say that all the time, but I'm actually very, very interested in what Cade Peterson is building at SoftwarmLLC. Basically, Cade is focusing on integration of Bitcoin mining technology into residential and industrial heating applications with off-the-shelf technology. And it's absolutely incredible. I'm fascinated by this kind of stuff, and we'll talk about it some more. But just a little bit of background on Cade real fast is Cade served for 20 years on active duty in the U.S. Air Force, primarily as an all-systems cross-trained aircraft mechanic. He endured 8 separate deployments and hundreds of operational missions aboard aircraft in and out of 36 different countries. So this man has done a lot for our country, and we salute you. So during his time in service, Cade also worked part-time as an in-person adjunct college professor, teaching mathematics to deployed service members and aircraft manufacturing methods to stateside civilians. His technical certifications and licenses earned include the Federal Aviation Administration airframe and power plant and private pilot certifications, along with a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and an ASE automotive mechanic certification. He holds a Bachelor and a Master of Science in Aeronautics from Embry-Riddle Aeronautic University and a Master of Business from the University of Southern California. So it's safe to say that he comes with plenty of accreditations, and he knows exactly what he's doing when it comes to building systems that integrate Bitcoin mining into residential, commercial heating applications. So I'm really excited to get this episode started. We're going to bring him up, and we're gonna get to it. Cade, welcome to the Build a Mind podcast. Thank you for being here with us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me and having me. This is great. I can't wait to share some of the things I've learned with everyone.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. I think our audience really enjoys learning from people who are building and working in the space. And you've done a lot. You have a really good, really interesting background with the active military duty and what you've been doing. So, if you want to give us a little bit more background on you or anything real quick,
yes,
I'll give you a couple minutes.
Sure. So I really thought I would end up being in the aircraft industry, maybe working for a large aircraft manufacturing company, kind of overseeing those programs. But I ended up kind of going down a different track, and ended up moving back home to where I'm originally from, which was in central Idaho. And I started getting really interested in Bitcoin mining, mainly because I saw the utility in immersion cooling. And I saw how easy it is. In everybody's mind, it's easy in theory to set up an immersion cooling loop and do all that. But started noticing some easy ways to integrate off-the-shelf systems and, commercial off-the-shelf, or COTS, as some people call it, systems into systems for immersion cooling. And it wasn't a Frankenstein project. I got admiration for a lot of people setting up Raspberry Pis and relays and different valves and controls, and then making their own immersion pump and all that stuff. But in reality, most of this stuff is just off the shelf, and it's just a matter of understanding terms and how it works, so you can just hook it all up and run it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that when we were talking on Twitter a little bit, you started saying some things that I had to go to Google and look at them, because I'm like, what the hell is he even talking about? What is these? I don't even know what the words were when you said them, but we're gonna get into it. So it'll be fun to kind of understand these terms, and like heat pump and coolers and stuff like that. I'm very green when it comes to this sort of stuff. I wouldn't say that I'm stupid. I know how to think about things. I know how to kind of process thought. But when people start talking about the depth of these systems, it kind of just goes over my head, and I have to do more research to find out. So it'll be fun to kind of get a beginner's questioning side of things to you, who's been in the space for a while.
Yeah. So I think one thing I really want people to understand, or that I try to express to people, is there's 2 different thoughts about how to run your miner, right? And it kind of centers around if your miner is profitable or not. And profitable means different things to different people. Maybe someone is just paying a little bit more for power than their miner produces in Bitcoin today, but they feel the value is going to go up. they like the KYC free Bitcoin. And so they don't mind. It's still profitable for them, right? They're still interested in having their miner run all the time. And in those kind of cases, you got to always have a heat dump going, right? You've always got to have a way to express the heat. You've got to ensure that it can run all year long and run efficiently. Because if it gets inefficient as it gets hot, you're going to not be profitable at all. You'll be spending a lot of money for electricity. So it's really important that, first off, the person who's starting to mine understands their condition of where they're at. You know, if they bought an old S9, it doesn't make sense to make it run all the time.
Yeah.
Right. But if they have an S21, they need to keep it running all the time because they need to get their ROI. They need to get their money back. And unless you're mining, you're not getting anything. You're losing money in terms of depreciation. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make sure that that's running all the time so that you can get your ROI. And then after you get your ROI on the cost of that machine, you can keep running and make more money. So looking at the system and how it works, you've really got to understand how you're going to control the heat energy that comes off of it. So there are setups like with air-cooled miners, right? And people have those in their house, but they only run when they need the heat. So if you're only running your miner when you need the heat, or you turn it down because you don't need as much heat, you're not getting the full benefit of the miner. And those kind of systems are great if your miner is not profitable to run. Okay. But what I focus on is primarily profitable systems that are profitable all the time. I want to keep that stocked with a new miner. And in order to do that, I have to create a heat system where I can dump all the heat from the miners. So,
all right. So, hey, I'm going to stop you real quick before we actually get into, explaining how the systems works. I really want to ask you how you got into starting to build these systems. Like, what was the catalyst that made you go, I can build a system, I can sell this system to, a vast amount of people, and they'll actually be able to use this to be profitable? What got you started down that road?
Well, first off, I got started on it kind of selfishly. I wanted to have my own mining operation to diversify my sources of income. Because I don't know if you've seen one of these or not. Is it backwards monitor or?
I can see it, but I'm not sure what it is.
This is a note from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe for $100 trillion.
Oh my Lord.
Right? You know how much I paid for this?
Probably not very much.
I paid a quarter. I gave a quarter at a gold and silver coin shop, and they had a stack of these things. And
it's a real Zimbabwe note.
This is a real piece of money.
Oh God.
And so, everybody thinks it can't happen to them. And I think it's important to diversify your money, your sources of wealth. So I wanted to go down that road, and I thought the best way to do it was to mine, because anytime you're mining and you're profitable, you're essentially cost dollar averaging every day at a discounted rate. So when everybody, Bitcoin's $45,000, I'm paying $30,000 if I bought one Bitcoin at a time, but I'm mining every day for the amount of power that I consume, right? Yeah. So every day I'm cost dollar averaging at a discounted rate. And then once, I have my money back. So that's really what started it out for me. And I thought, well, how can I make this even more cost effective? Well, if I'm offsetting my house, which already has electric heat through a radiant floor heat system, if I just use that electric energy to run Bitcoin miners, it is going to consume the same amount of energy and produce the same amount of BTU, but I'm going to get paid for it. So essentially my cost basis is zero. Anytime you're replacing existing heat needs with a miner, and this is like, I get questions like this, people just don't understand. This is the most critical thing you got to understand. If you're replacing an existing heat cost, the cost to acquire your Bitcoin is zero.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you already have that cost, right?
But it's interesting that you say that, and I'll just give a quick story. I got into Bitcoin mining because I bought an S9, and I was like, hey, I want to bring this home just to play with it because I wanted to play with Bitcoin mining. And what happened was I set this thing up on my counter, and it starts producing a mass amount of heat and noise. And once I figured out how to get rid of the noise, I mean, this thing heated up my house, my whole house, and it's a very small house, but it heated up the entire house, and it paid for itself and gave me a small amount of Bitcoin. And that's the most inefficient ASIC that you can plug into the wall right now. So that's kind of what led me down the system. So sorry to interject, but
no,
go ahead.
You're totally right, Trevor. That's exactly, you're on target, man. And that's it. It's like, it doesn't matter what ASIC you're using. It will always be cheaper to heat with a Bitcoin miner. Even if you have the oldest, even if somebody pays you to take their ASIC, right? So you get something out of it, and that's the point. And for each owner, that's their own decision, like how much they want to invest in a miner. But to the point now, you can get an S19 for $500, right? And so you can have a loud, obnoxious S19 running, especially in an unoccupied space. It's great, I wouldn't put it around animals and stuff because it disrupts their environment, right? My pets don't like it; they don't like being around it. But when I have an immersion cooled system, it's silent, right?
Yeah.
And I've got some systems set up where we don't even have a dry cooler. It just silently pumps fluid to disperse the heat. And with aftermarket systems and aftermarket firmware like Brains OS, and I think Luxor has some of this capability. They just came online with some auto tuning stuff, which is great. You can actually have the computer dynamically adjust based on temperature. And so it will automatically move and adjust its own hash rate, power consumption based upon the chip temperature. And
basically making it like hands-free for most of the consumers who are using these products, right?
Yeah, but you need to watch it and tune it and make sure it's running like it's supposed to. Make sure your temperature controllers or the logic in them are correct, which isn't that hard to do. I mean, you can buy a temperature controller on eBay for like $30, and you can hook that directly to your dry coolers or series of dry coolers and control the temperature by augmenting the outputs on the dry coolers. Okay. It's a really simple system, but it's all off the shelf stuff, and you just got to have a basic understanding of 115 volt circuits, 240 volt domestic power, and the difference between that and 3-phase. And don't be afraid to hire an electrician.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've said here on the show before, is that, if you don't understand, electricity and voltage and stuff like that, like, you should hire an electrician. It's always better to obfuscate that responsibility when you're dealing with high power and stuff like that. I don't want anybody to kill themselves because they did something wrong.
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, you can start a fire, you got to have thick enough cable. You got to know how many amps you're going to pull, what your outlet is. Like, there's a little bit of knowledge to be learned there. So, I mean, if you already know all that stuff, great. I mean, that's one reason I like where I live, is because I don't want to say government oversight is low. I don't want to say that, because it's enough. If you're wiring a house or doing an electrical job, you need to have a permit to do it. But generally, we don't have a lot of obnoxious inspections. When I lived in California, we had a solar system put on our roof. Okay. And they came to inspect the solar system on my roof and then said they had to come in my house and see if I have a carbon monoxide detector. So what does that have to do with the solar system? Nothing. It was just an excuse for government to come into your house and look around.
Charge you money,
right? Because that carbon monoxide detector has nothing to do with my solar system.
Yeah.
Right. So it's examples like that where, and why people like, I think, to live in more, and when you're mining Bitcoin, I think you need to think about this as well. What is the local politic, right? And how do people think about it? If you call your power company and say, hey, I need a 400 amp panel upgrade because I'm mining Bitcoin, they're going to be like, no way, man. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they don't think about it. All right. Here's what you say. I am converting to an electric low temperature boiler. because that's exactly what immersion cooling is. It's a low temperature electric boiler. And if you go look at an electric boiler and the sticker on it, you know how they have like efficiency stickers on heaters and water heaters?
Yeah, like the nameplate or whatever.
Yeah. Do you know what percentage efficiency an electric boiler is?
No, I don't.
100. It's 100% efficient. ASICs are basically the same thing.
Interesting.
You have an electric boiler. And so what we're doing is we're taking and literally electrifying the homes and the heat systems. And it's exactly what people are claiming they want, right? They want everything to go electric and have renewable, right?
Right. So that's basically the way to get the electric company on board to upgrade your household amperage, is what you're saying. Is like you give them this reason, electric low voltage boiler or whatever you.
Yeah.
And
the connotation, you know, if somebody goes on Google and looks up Bitcoin mining, they see a bunch of servers on racks. They think you're going to open up a warehouse in your backyard and then pull more power than they'd ever planned for on the grid.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the grid's going to have to adjust. These power companies, I don't know why some of them are so against it. Not all of them. We work closely with our local power company to make sure they know what we're putting in so they can plan. And they can put the right size transformers in, because what company on earth wouldn't want to sell more of their product?
Yeah, you're right. And I've noticed in my locality that they don't understand it, so they're kind of put off by it. But just like you're saying, if you can kind of speak to them in a way that they understand, they're all for it. They're like, give me your money, like go build it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to make sure you can still see my video, and because you kind of froze up there, but you can see me okay, right?
Yeah, this happens sometimes. The video is frozen up on my end, so we'll just keep going, and it should unfreeze. If it does anything weird, we'll be able to cut it post process.
Okay, cool.
So, let's see. How do you explain this system to someone who has never mined Bitcoin before or doesn't really understand how the process works?
Usually I show them pictures.
Okay.
Show them pictures, or I show them in person. If I don't have either of those, I guess the best way to explain it is that first off, they need to understand that the computers are totally submerged in fluid. So when I say like fluid cooled or immersion cooled, it just doesn't register in people's head. Still there? Looks like I lost you, Trevor.
All right. Sorry about that. This is ridiculous. Anyway.
Did you have a little disconnect? We could start over with the question if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll ask the question again, and we'll just have it in post processing.
Okay.
So I don't know why it does this. So redo everything. All right. So, let's see. No way. Okay. So how do you explain this system to somebody who doesn't understand Bitcoin, doesn't really know how Bitcoin mining works?
Well, oh man, you know how the Bitcoin rabbit hole goes. You know, I went and met with my state representative, okay? And he looked at me, and I talked with him for about 30 minutes, and he looked at me and he said, just real quick, explain how Bitcoin works to me. And he was kind of arrogant about it, you know? And I said, well, that's a long conversation, and I've got different books I can have you read to understand how the whole thing works. Because, you know, you give a little snippet of something and people will ask a question, and it takes so much time to explain it all.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he lost his primary election. So that's what happens. So anyway, I'm just saying, Bitcoin in general, I guess different people want to understand in different ways. Some people just acquiesce and say, look, I don't really understand how it works, but explain to me the physical way to mine. And why does it help to heat my house? And the best way I can explain it to them in a systems engineering way is that basically they are getting paid to heat their house. And then they ask the question, well, how does Bitcoin work? How am I getting paid? How can I sell my Bitcoin? I can't go to the store and use it. You know, they're not aware of Coinbase. And then I go down this rabbit hole of explaining to them all the mechanics of that. But let's just assume for a second that someone understands how Bitcoin itself works, right? The network, they have a basic understanding of how to hold a wallet and all those things. So the way I would explain that these systems work is that you basically have an isolated low temperature boiler loop. That's the fundamental requirement behind it. You're not taking all this fluid and pumping it everywhere in your loop. The immersion cooling fluid is oil based. It's like a synthetic oil that's not toxic.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself, you want to keep as short as possible because it's expensive. For one, it's like $10 a liter. And you need to keep it as small as possible in a loop because you don't want to expose that loop to places that might leak 50 feet away or anything like that. And plus, it's not really compatible. I mean, it'll work with PEX, you know, but it's really made for different types of hose, like Parker 801 hose, which is like power steering hose, or oil that's made for oil, right? So once you understand that you have to make a loop that maintains that heat of the ASIC, you want that heat maintained all the time, you extract that heat energy from that loop with like a braze plate heat exchanger. Okay, like if you are kind of curious what that is, you can see them for different use cases. Like there's specific types of heat exchangers for swimming pools because the chlorine will eat the copper or the other metals in the heat exchanger. And then, you know, maybe, for example, I've got an application where I have gravity fed natural water that I can use for heat dispersal, right? So I don't need a dry cooler. I just have running water that I can just run through it. That's not out of my spigot, right?
Okay. And that cools the oil down so it doesn't overheat.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very simplistic system. It's just a immersion cooled computer fog hashing C1 with a singular loop that goes through a braze plate heat exchanger. That's it. And then the other side just has water that runs through it. The water comes out and waters my chickens.
Wow.
So we have a longer freeze, period before it freezes.
Yeah.
Winter time. So pet water, and if, someone's got a question about like, is it safe and all that? Well, my pets ain't dead. Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
so it's obviously working.
And you would know it's leaking because the fluid would drop out of the tank and plus it's non-toxic fluid, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want water in my miner.
Right. So it's kind of two separate systems. You've got your oil system, which is, like you said, on a closed loop in a short duration, going through a heat exchanger, which, you know, heats up the water, which can go further distances, because you don't necessarily, like, if water leaks or something like that, it's not as big of a deal. It's not costly when building these systems. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
There's no concern of the fluid escaping the loop, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And so you can go out and get a different type of heat exchanger. And I really was looking at this, like, when I first started doing it, I was like, what is the most ridiculous heat exchanger I can find? And so I looked on eBay and I got a car air water heat exchanger, and I we ground the top off and pressure checked it and re-welded some of the flow direction things in there. And like, it would work. I'm sure it would work, but I don't have the faith in that heat exchanger. I don't have faith that some guy working over in China, like, doesn't have a pinhole in it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, the risk tolerance I have on that is pretty high. I mean, pretty low. Sorry. So I don't want to use that heat exchanger. So I started looking around a little bit closer, and what I found was that, yeah, brazed plate heat exchangers. Everybody should be familiar with that. They're really cheap on eBay. They generally come in like a 3/4 MPT or British pipe thread, which is like more of a straight thread. You know, NPT, like November Papa Tango, has a taper on it, and it seals with you know, like Teflon. Okay. And it seals based upon the difference in the connector and the nipple. They kind of crimp on each other, right? That's a normal pipe thread. The straight pipe threads use like a flat gasket, like a hose. Now, a hose is different thread pitch, but what I'm getting at is that it's a pretty universal, 3/4, like a pretty universal thread size. Sorry, my hands are kind of distracting probably.
You're good. You're good.
But the hoses will just thread on there. And what you'll find is that you go on supplyhouse.com. I like Supply House. They're pretty good. Little shout out for Supply House. We get them up there. You can go in and find components that'll fit the unique thing that you're building. And once you understand how all the fittings go together and what you're ordering, it's not really that expensive or hard to connect these systems. If you just understand the basic first order concept, if you want to have a profitable miner, that you need to keep it running all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to have a way to turn on that heat dump when you don't need the heat.
It makes sense.
Yep. And then with those brazed plate heat exchangers, if you want to extract heat from your miner, you place it right after the miner. Okay, so the fluid is coming out nice and hot going through the heat exchanger, and then it goes to the heat dump. Don't send it to the heat dump first and then to the heat exchanger, right? So on the other end of your heat exchanger, your brazed plate heat exchanger, that's where you run your hydronic fluid through. And so we could start on hydronics here in just a moment, but if you're heating water, glycol, whatever liquid you want to heat up, you're going to run it through the other side, and you can control that and how it runs with its own pump.
Okay, interesting. So let's see. I want to ask you, what would you say is the hardest thing about building these integrated heat systems?
I think the hardest thing is finding a good customer. Because I prefer, honestly, like with the customers I work with, that they just let me consult with them and they build their systems. Like, so the Bitcoin car wash, I don't know if you saw that one.
I did. I saw that one on Twitter, and I'll link it in the show notes so people can find it.
Yeah. So we set up a Bitcoin heated car wash. It uses a fog hashing B6 tank, which is a closed loop immersion cooled tank. And it literally just pumps inside the tank. And so the heat exchanger's in the B6. And so we basically run all the hydronic fluid through the B6. And it's filled with, antifreeze, essentially, glycol. And, some people, it's kind of funny when you post these new things and people see them, they're like, oh, what do you do when it freezes? Ha, 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 you're dummy. Like, no, man, there's not water in it. I know you think there's water in it, but that's not what it is. So yeah, we use antifreeze or glycol in a closed loop, just like any traditional hydronic system, right?
Okay.
But the thing you have to remember when you're using Bitcoin miners for heat is they don't get as hot as a traditional electric boiler. A boiler will get up to like 170 degrees. And your Bitcoin miner is going to put out 120 if it's hot. Okay, like an amp miner.
Yeah.
I think the Watts miners will pump out a little more, depending on the model. I am about to venture in to try out a few Watts miners and see how they do. But anyway, going back to the topic of hydronics, you've got to be able to move more volume because the temperature differential is lower. So traditionally, you'd put like 1/2-inch PEX in like a radiant floor. A lot of people do that. That's how my house is built out.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that kind of stuff. I should do construction. So I mean, I've never built one, but I kind of understand the dynamics of it.
Right. And so if you can't get the fluid as hot, you need to be able to run more fluid to get the same amount of heat in the structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we size it up to 5/8, which seems not to be a common thing you can buy at the store. You kind of have to order the parts for, but it flows a lot more. And then we space it pretty closely. Like traditionally, if someone would use 5/8, they would space it farther apart on a traditional boiler. But when we build these systems, I don't know if you saw our 40x60 shop laid out with the green underlayment.
I did not see that one. The last one I saw was it looked like you were building a driveway.
Okay, yeah, well, that's my sidewalk
Okay.
at my house. But the warehouse, I think, I don't know, there might be one out there somewhere. I haven't seen one, but it may be the first purpose-built structure to be heated with Bitcoin. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to claim that if it's not true, but I haven't seen any others. So basically, it's a huge concrete floor. We put in 7 different zones. It's going to have a split-level apartment in it. It's not my structure. It's one of my customers. And yeah, we've laid that whole thing out with the intent of being heated with 6 ASICs. So essentially, each ASIC puts out about 10,000 BTU.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll put out 60 to 70,000 BTU. We could put aftermarket power supply units on them if we want and overclock them. But yeah, and normally, I mean, like a boiler would be 100-something thousand BTU. But boilers come on demand. That's the other thing a lot of people don't think about. They look at their boiler and like, oh, well, it's 180,000 BTU boiler. Well, that thing comes on and off, and it needs to be able to, heat. But when you're running Bitcoin miners, you've got heat saturation. It's just always on.
Okay. So how do you control that heat in the radiant floor system or something like that? Because in the summertime, maybe you don't need it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is also one of the questions, for people that are really skeptical of Bitcoin. They're like, oh, well, how do you get rid of the heat, huh? We didn't think of that one, Yeah,
I'm an engineer. I thought of everything.
Yeah. So, no, what you have to have is a heat dump loop that's rated for the amount of BTUs that you put out. And you have to plan so that you can dump that many BTU consistently in the summer. So however that looks, maybe you go dig a huge hole out behind the building and you put some coils back there that you dump the heat out in the ground, right? Okay. Or you just put a dry cooler in it. And you can put the heat dump on the dry cooler or the immersion loop. And that's really probably the best way to do it, in my opinion, because the temperature differential across the glycol and the heat exchanger won't dump the heat as effectively. So you need to basically make your heat dump bigger on the glycol loop if you don't want a dry cooler on your immersion loop. But the immersion loop itself, it's pretty simple. It's just a little more money, to get a dry cooler. And if you have a way to dump the heat, or if your hydronic system is big enough to where you can't express all of the heat out of, or you can out of the immersion loop, then you don't necessarily need a engineer heat dump in there. And that's what we found on a few of our systems, is that almost like if you use a little bit less power on your miner, there's no problem in expressing the heat on some of them. Okay. And then like the car wash, for example, we can dump the heat all day long. It doesn't matter. It's summertime. And there's no dry cooler. And so like for a car wash, did you see the concrete plant too?
I did not see the concrete plant.
Okay. So for those who haven't seen that, we also heat a 3,000 gallon water tank at the concrete plant. And the reason they need hot water is because, you know, it freezes in the wintertime and we still got to pour concrete. And makes so sense. You also need to, on the wash tanks on the trucks, fill it with hot water. So the owner was previously paying for propane to heat the water, and they're paying like $1,000 a month in propane. And now power bill is about $120 a month here to run one miner if it's on all the time, running full. So $240 a month in electrical costs, and up until the halving, they were generating, you know, 500, 600 a month sometimes in revenue equivalent Bitcoin. So they were covering all their power costs. So the cost difference to them really was like $1,200 a month to install these things, and that's net, right?
Yeah. That's incentive right there. That's all you need.
Yeah, and if you're concerned about burning propane, you know, for those who have a legitimate, or they feel it's legitimate concern about burning hydrocarbons, this solves their issue, right? This meets all the checks that people claim to want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And yet people are still against Bitcoin. And really what it's doing is it's funding a green energy revolution. You think about this now, like all the green energy. I'm about to put solar on my house here, but if I was to just sell my power back to the grid, it makes 0 sense for me to do that. Yeah, because my cost avoidance rate's only like 6 cents a kilowatt hour on a bad day. Okay, so if I mine Bitcoin, I'm making more money per kilowatt hour, a lot more, if I'm using that energy to mine Bitcoin. And so you can scale that to anything. If you want to build a big solar farm out in the field, you're going to get more money per kilowatt hour if you're mining Bitcoin. If I want to build a hydroelectric plant, I can finally afford it, because in the past, we've got so much hydroelectric energy here in Idaho. And in the past, these hydroelectric plants haven't come in, because if you sell your power to the grid, you're only making 4 cents a kilowatt hour, because that's the rate they'll buy it from you for.
Yeah, so it's not cost effective for them to come in and just do that. But when you pair them with Bitcoin miners, all of a sudden it becomes very cost effective.
Well, it's a match made in heaven. You think about this, like if you engineer the hydroelectric plants to consume power on site, and that's one thing a lot of them don't have, but if you engineer it to where you can consume all the power on the site, and then you build a Bitcoin mine essentially, and if you want to have a swimming pool up there with the heated water, whatever, right? You can essentially turn the Bitcoin miners off and sell back to the grid, just like they're doing in Texas, if there's an emergency. So as far as energy production goes, we finally have a way to fund these complex and expensive projects without having like a bunch of government subsidies and public works done. There's an interest in private capital coming in and developing a hydroelectric plant or renewing one that exists that isn't operating because it's not profitable. So we're going to see a lot more power come online, I think, in the next decade with the incentives that come from mining Bitcoin.
I would definitely agree with that. This is I've said it before on the podcast, but this is my first cycle. I just got into Bitcoin mining a couple of months ago, but I'm starting to see this pattern, and obviously the efficiency of these miners have to go up. You have to find more efficient ways to use the heat or the energy and stuff like that. But we're seeing energy grids become more stabilized, more secure, and output more power because Bitcoin miners are coming in and buying up that power. So it's kind of just a revolving cycle where they build out the grid more because Bitcoin miners come in and pay for the power, and then everybody kind of flourishes. It's really awesome.
In times of emergency, you might pay more per kilowatt hour. Like if we had a huge earthquake and lost power, didn't have enough, and we had to turn the miners off to help support the town, whatever it is, I think it'd be reasonable for people to expect to pay more for their power in those kind of situations. And that's a benefit for a Bitcoin mining company that can come in and build a plant.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
So we have this capability that's there, but for whatever reason, some people just can't get past the fact that they don't like Bitcoin. And it's mainly because they don't understand what it is. And, I hear arguments from people all the time. And like my response in my head is like, tell me that you don't know what you're talking about without telling me you don't know what you're talking about. Right. We've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
But you can just like the argument. I haven't heard a really informed argument against it yet. And
so, I don't really think there is one, honestly. I think that a lot of people don't understand, and they like to pretend that they do. So, they talk about, wasted energy or it's gonna heat or it's gonna boil the world's oceans, those kinds of things. And it's just, those are misconceptions that only an ignorant person would really talk about, because it's not true. It's just
think about this, Trevor, too. Why can't we use it to provide heat for low-income families? Think about that, man. Like, all you need is one C1. One miner is going to provide enough heat for a double wide or single wide.
It's funny that you say that, because I have this theory that if we can integrate these systems, these literal systems that you're building into low-income lives, we can raise the standard of living for these people while simultaneously dropping the cost of living. Which, what does that do? That creates human flourishing, and people are able to be more productive, which means that they can add more to society, and they can build a better world. And so it's just that feedback loop that just feeds back in on itself. And why wouldn't these companies be incentivized to put that kind of a heat system into a low-income residence?
Right. And here's the other thing too. These large companies, I don't have anything against them mining Bitcoin. Mine it. Let's do it. Right. But it doesn't generate political capital. Right. You've got this perception that there's these big companies that make a lot of money using the electricity, but most people don't really understand that they're improving the grid in doing so, and improving resiliency of our electrical grid. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, if we have more people, and this is why I want everybody to know how to do this. I think everybody, it's almost like a Second Amendment issue, where people need the right to own and hold their own money. And as, I don't know if you've read Soft War.
I haven't, but it's on my list.
But Jason Lowery's expression of what Bitcoin is and how it will be used is really compelling. And I think he makes a lot of good arguments that as a cybersecurity tool in the future, it can be used to protect protect you, use as a method of defense, similar to the Second Amendment. It's kind of interesting. So, no, but I think that getting it diversified into as many homes as possible, with people learning self-custody, seeing that it can, heat their home and provide them some type of revenue stream and discount their power, right? There's a lot to be said when more people are using it. Because it's one thing, let's say you live in a town of 10,000 people, and a big mining company comes in and is just sucking the power down. They're making a bunch of money. Everybody gets jealous. And for whatever reason, there's a perceived problem in a political movement to charge them more money or kick them out of the town. When everybody starts seeing the benefits of mining in their own little sphere in their house, for example, we have a prototype out, and it ran all winter long. It did great. The homeowner, it's a single wide trailer with skirting, and we put heat underneath their skirting essentially, and configured it so that it has a heat dump as well. But it basically heats the whole underneath of their single wide and radiates up. Last winter, not this winter that we just got through, but the winter before, they used about a pallet and a half of pellets in their pellet stove to heat. This winter they used 3 bags.
Okay, that's right there.
Okay. And we use a meter to see how much power the miner is using, and then just calculate the rate, and then go pay their used portion on their power bill.
So let me ask you. There's a lot of people that live in situations like that, and I live in a single wide myself. What is the average cost to build that type of system?
It depends, Trevor. Are you mining for profit or are you mining for heat?
I'm mining for heat.
Okay, heat only, because that can reduce your cost and depend on what kind of ASIC you want to buy. Right?
I mean, if I could get the most efficient ASIC and make a little profit on top, that's great. But mainly, I'm looking to even out in the wash.
So you want, like, right now you'd want like an S19J probably, or an S19. But I like the Js because you can turn them down more.
Okay.
And they're more efficient when they're turned down. But when you need the heat, turn them up, right? So right. I have like one of my S19Js. I've got a 8 kilowatt pack on it, PSU, and so like in my basement here, that's how I heat my basement. Is I have right now it's running at about 1,800 watts, and then I can turn it up if I want to 5,000 watts if I want, and that's directly linear on the amount of heat that's going to come out, right?
Right.
So if you want it like a setup like that, I think you could budget for about $4,000.
Oh, that's actually not that bad.
No, it's not. And it just depends on your miner, right? But a lot of things people don't think about is the micro infrastructure. Okay, that's what I call it. Once you have your micro infrastructure in place, you can always swap your computer out. And what is micro infrastructure? That is the dedicated line from your circuit breaker panel to your outlet. It's your data running to your mining point. It's your immersion cooling system. And it's your power distribution unit, your PDU. It could include a meter box so that you can measure how much power is running through it. And maybe you have some other needs that you have, like maybe you need to run the hose through a wall. And so you need to have it look nice, right? And you need to have some good trim on there. Maybe you're going a little bit bigger and you're installing a hydronic system that's going to run off of this. So you could consider that part of your infrastructure, right? But think about this, man. Like I'm getting to the point where I can run about 10 ASICs at my house, and I'm using the heat for different things. Okay, so when I first started, there's no way I could do that. I didn't have my micro infrastructure in place, right? But once I have that in place, I can always just put a new computer in. And so basically what I'm doing is transitioning my house to be a Bitcoin heat powered house. Okay. And in doing so, if I can support 10 miners, like what is the revenue on that? Well, it depends on my miners, obviously, but I could support 10 S21s, right?
So you can upgrade over time, especially as we see these cycles, halvings cut miner revenue in half. You can upgrade the efficiency of your system by just dropping in a different unit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All your micro infrastructure is there.
Yeah, but that's what it's about. It's about infrastructure. It's the same problem the big mining companies have. They got to put in the infrastructure to support. You can't just go buy 1 million S19s, or S21s and plug them in. You got to have the infrastructure in place. So I think, working with people that can do that to their own building is really important.
Well, it's funny because I'm actually I'm trying to heat my home with ASIC heat. I played with the S9. It was more efficient than my heater. I was like, all right, great. How can I upgrade this? I have almost all of the stuff to do an air cooled system. But now that I'm talking to you, I'm like, well, what if I just built an immersion system? And I'm not sure that I will or not, but I'm really curious about it now. You've got my brain firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, so here's how you could set one up real easy for your house. So, like, do you have to heat in the skirting under your house?
I don't have to, but my plan right now is to use the ASIC, have it running all the time, and I was going to dump air using a baffle plate. I want to run it at 99% uptime, so I was going to use the air, dump it underneath into the skirting of the house, just so that when I don't need the heat inside, it's going underneath the house and venting out.
Right, and there's always a way to do duct work and all that stuff. But one of the problems I have with air-cooled miners is that they collect dust. If there is a fire, they're open to the air. Okay? An immersion-cooled miner is not exposed to the air, so it won't burn.
Okay.
Right? It might fry. The only time I fried one doing immersion cooling is I was running Vanish and I overclocked it a little bit. Didn't like it. I've never fried one with brains, so I prefer brains over Vanish. But with the immersion, you can put a dry cooler and have air distribution still. And the thing you got to realize too is if you put one under your in your skirting, you have like a pretty limited environment. Mm-hmm. You need a larger heat exchanger, because if you want to warm your house up that way, you got to get it hot under there. And if you get it hot under there, you need a bigger heat exchanger to get rid of the heat, so the computers don't get too hot.
Okay.
Right? So, but the outside dump, essentially, you'll have your immersion cooling tank, and it'll run to your internal heat exchanger, and then it runs to your external heat exchanger as far as the fluid loop goes. And then that runs back to your tank. And then all you have to do is get a temperature controller off of eBay with a hot and a cold output on the plug-in. Okay. And then what that temperature controller does is when you reach target, it turns cool on, which is outside. And when it's too cold underneath your house, or if you put the dry cooler in your house, it turns it on, and it just has a temperature probe on it. So you regulate your temperature. You're always letting fluid flow through it, but you regulate the temperature output with the fans on the dry cooler. And so I went down the road of trying to modulate the fluid and figure out a fluid control valve and where to direct the fluid all the time. But it's much easier, and it's a 98% solution basically, to just modulate the fan output with your temperature controller. And it's super easy. It's all off the shelf.
That's crazy. So my next question, and this is a new question. Let's say, so does this all have to be inside of the house or underneath the skirting, or can I put this unit, like the C1, outside of the house exposed to the elements? Like what's the case for that? Do I have to build a shed for it, or?
You need to have it out of the weather. It'd be okay in the cold, I think, but at least put it under skirting, and you got to have enough headspace above it so you can pull the computer out if you need to.
Right. But, so I think in my situation, I'd want to build like a little mining shed outside the side of the house.
Yeah, just something to keep the rain and the snow off of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you got to keep an eye on your fluid level differentiation too, right? So if I have a mining tank and it's on the ground, and then I put a dry cooler 5 feet above it, if I get a little air in there, it's going to come out and overflow my tank, right?
Okay.
So you want to look at the manufacturer's guidelines. I've really liked fog hashing's they're kind of a pioneer, I think, in the space of individual
Yeah, we work with them personally on some things, and there's a bunch of stuff that's going to come out in the future with Scott's crypto mining and fog hashing. But I've met the guys personally.
Yeah,
they're absolutely incredible, and the technology that they're building is just
phenomenal. The thing I really like about their C1 machines, especially their newer ones. I've liked some of the improvements they've done. I have the older versions. I have one of each at least. I've got well, indirectly, we have about 15 of the original C1s, and I think about 5 of the second generation, and then I have about 3 of the newest ones.
Okay.
So the newest ones and the second generation, I think they did really good with the pump upgrade. They're super reliable. I like how they put the PDU, the power distribution unit, external on the newest version, because primarily the previous versions, you had to go manually turn them on after a power outage.
Yeah. So now you can just easily hook it up to a thing that allows it to switch.
Yeah. Well, it's automatically comes back on when the power comes on.
Okay.
Much easier. I think better for kind of autonomous running, if you want to just keep a watershed warm in a remote location. Like we've got one of my customers, you might have seen this on X, I don't know, but they've got a cabin that's a family cabin. Okay. And we just set up a single C1 unit in their basement. Same propane story. They basically have killed $600 to $800 a month in propane costs, and instead just generated a bunch of Bitcoin. They've more than paid for their power, and so it's a no-brainer. And the only thing holding people back is their own FUD.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. It really does. I'm loving this conversation. I wish we had more time to talk about it, because I just want to talk about my situation in general, because I'm really like interested in heating my home with ASIC heat, and what you're doing is crazy. But we kind of got to close up here pretty soon. But so what do you? Let me see. How do I phrase this? Where do you start when you're a DIY pleb, just wanting to get into building one of these systems? Do you want people to come directly to you, or do you care if they go off on their own? Where would you send them to find out how to start building these systems on any scale?
I don't mind sharing. That's one reason I wanted to come on and kind of explain it to people. I would really like, sometimes I get asked the same question by people, and they haven't really looked through what I have on X. So if they just look a little bit, they might find their answers and all that. We're working on some really cool systems right now that we'd probably share some basic designs for, like a hotel motel, for example.
Okay.
Having a centralized heat core with like a bunch of machines. Mm-hmm. And then using a distribution unit with that. Commercial buildings, which we've already had a couple of those, but even more complex systems. If someone really wants to get started, what I would say to them is just do it. You can sit around and try to over-engineer everything and come up with your own system and all that. And, that's kind of fun if that's what wants to be your hobby, or what you want your hobby to be. But all this stuff is just available on the shelf. Like you can order these components, you can order these systems, they'll come shipped to you. You can set them up, see how they work, and then go a little farther. So, before we close out, I just want to tell you the next thing I'm doing is we're actually designing a system to integrate and heat a traditional domestic water tank in your house. Okay. And I've got all the components. We're going to be wiring it up here in the next couple of weeks. But it's going to be basically a split unit system that heats an addition on the house, has a heat dump engineered to it, and also heats a domestic water tank. And the reason why I wanted to go down this route is because to avoid over engineering and show how simple it can be and cheap. Right. So long story short, we're going to use a recirculating water pump hooked to a thermostat controller. And it's it's all available on Supply House. But it's hard to explain to people how all this stuff bolts up and fits together if they don't have it themselves or they don't see it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me because it's hard for me to kind of picture it.
Yeah, so you really gotta understand, what is a 240 volt circuit? Like, what's that look like? What thickness is the wire to do it? Is that really what I can support? And so if you're not familiar with those things, you should get an electrician, and pay attention to what's going on and learn from it, obviously. And then you can kind of move on to making more circuits in your house. A lot of states permit you to do your own electrical work. If you're the homeowner, you still need to get a permit, but you can do that yourself if you know how to do it. And once you really start understanding those fundamentals, like how to do electrical, the basics behind the plumbing, even if you hire additional contractors and you order stuff off the shelf, it makes a lot more sense, and it's really not hard. So I really want to encourage people to just try it out, because we all own a little bit of the grid. I've commented about this on X a little bit, but I see a lot of real estate naysayers that think that real estate is just, and it has its market flows, ebbs and flows. But when you own a home, and this is different in each state and obviously jurisdictions and regions, but when you own a home, you own part of the energy grid. And really what this comes down to is you controlling hash rate. Not just Bitcoin, but controlling hash rate. And hash rate does yield money.
Yeah.
So, like right now, I've got a 400 amp service on my house. I can comfortably pull about 200 amps for Bitcoin mining and still power my house. So, if each machine is 15 amps when it's running, just for rule of thumb and quick math, that's more than 10 machines.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, and every home, has a 200 amp service. So it's not unreasonable for a home to run 4 machines. And you can do the math on that, when before the halving and the market's going to come back and people are still going to be able to make money. Before the halving, we were making about $300 a month per S19.
Multiply that out by 5. I mean, let's just say 5 machines, $300 per machine. That right there is like two middle income jobs right there.
Well, it's like renting a room out in your house or two, right?
It's a third it's a revenue stream.
It is.
Like, that's literally okay. So I believe that the middle class built this country. We are the ones that did all the work. We put all the energy in and all that stuff. And the middle class has been deteriorating for the longest time. But what you're talking about is literally going to revive the middle class and make people self-sufficient again.
It can, yeah. And, damned is going to be the person who tries to control it all.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah. And so we need more people to man up, proverbially. I'm just saying, we could woman up too, whatever, but grow a pair and start mining with your own resources. There's a lot of, look at the 100 Acres Ranch guy. He's out there in the middle of nowhere, living the hard life. He's making cool stuff. Yeah. Right. So I'm just saying, if you're really interested in it, and you've got the resources, you've got a power rate that'll support it, even if you use electric heat, ASICs are going to be more profitable for you, period. It doesn't matter.
Full stop.
If you're using electric, if you're using natural gas, you might need to do a little math. If you're using propane, it's probably more profitable to mine Bitcoin to heat your home. And it's, if you got to do an air-cooled system, there's Cloudline fans. You can do that. I've got a couple of those out there.
That's what I'm actually going to be using. I am going to build my system, and I'm going to be making a couple of videos on it to kind of show people how it can be done. And it's really not that hard when you put all of the pieces together and you just start building. Anybody who can drive a car can figure this shit out. It's not that hard.
And here's the other thing too, like construction sites, right?
Yep.
I don't know
if where you're going with this. I know where you're going.
Torpedoes, right? You got the propane one. You always got the new guy that's got to go fill the propane up.
Yep.
You're spending like $15 a day in propane. Why not pass that cost on to the owner of the construction site, because it's their building, and then just get some of the hash rate out of it, or talk with them and maybe split it with them or something. And then you don't have the fumes in the building either, and it's always warm. So
it's a lot safer too.
Yeah, it is.
So, I got a couple more questions for you, just real quick before we close out. So, out of all of the systems that you've built, what was your favorite one to build? What was the coolest system that you built?
I think the concrete plant and the water tanks, heating and figuring out how to heat that big water tank with 2 miners. And not only that, but the original fog hashing C1s, they needed to be modified because they had a factory defect. And so fog hashing worked with me, on that, and they gave me the parts to do it. And so we modified those, and then we couldn't find any information about how somebody was heating water, with them. So we just kind of figured it out, put it all together. And it took some time and a little bit of trial and error, also hooking up the thermostatic controller, figure out how to, make the propane heater come on if they want it up to 165 degrees, which they don't ever, but we figured out how to integrate that as well. And so getting all that done from the ground up with no one telling us how to do it was, I think, probably the coolest one. And that thing runs like a champ. Those even though those fog hashing units, I think they're going on 2 years old now, they don't ever shut off.
They just run 100% of the time.
Just run. Super reliable.
Yeah.
And the owner's been happy about it. And of course, I shared a little hash rate with them because I help them with it,
Yeah.
But I think that was probably our coolest system, not because of the way it looks now. It's not as clean as, my most recent one, like in my garage and my sidewalk, right, which you saw on X. But I think that being a pioneering one was kind of cool.
Yeah, and I think that it really shows like the diversity of things that can be built with these systems and the longevity that they can hold out. I mean, it's kind of a win-win situation for Bitcoiners, for the grid, for the person who's building it, and all of it in general. I'm actually absolutely fascinated by it, and the more I dive down this rabbit hole, the more I'm just like light bulbs going off. I'm like, oh, you can do this? Like, wait, what? You can do that? We just had a conversation with a guy who was talking about some people in his meetup group who were using ASICs to save a lamb that almost died. They converted a greenhouse. They dumped the ASIC heat in there. They saved this lamb, and I know that that's not like super related to this.
No, you're right on target. You're right on target, Trevor. So, for example, okay, where I live, there's a lot of ranching. Okay, we have a lot of cattlemen out here, and a lot of these places have pivots, and a pivot is where the water comes up out of the ground and it irrigates, and is pumped out of there. And there's usually a 3-phase feed there, but the 3-phase feed is seasonal. Okay, and it's always there, but it's not turned on except for when the growing season happens. But the calves are born when it's still winter.
It's cold. And
so you can dual purpose this power output as a livestock warming place, right? So the calves don't die.
Which it turns out to be more profitable for you as the rancher.
Yes. Yeah.
Like that's kind of what I'm getting at in like I feel like the phase shift that's going to happen is Bitcoiners who want to get into Bitcoin mining and want to be profitable They're going to need to find ways to build secondary businesses, that need that heat for one reason or another. And if you're already a rancher, if you're already a farmer, or maybe you're, growing hemp for whatever reason, you can use that heat, make money off of it, because, hey, you're already paying for the heat in one way or another. And now all of a sudden you're mining Bitcoin that's paying for the heat itself. And it's making you much more profitable in the long run.
And here's a scenario too. Let's say I got a commercial building, okay, and it's got a good 3-phase feed, and I want to put a B24 in it, which is 24 unit immersion cooled tank. Okay. So I'm going to throw that in there. That's going to produce about 240,000 BTU, which is way more than the building needs.
Yeah.
Okay? But there's no reason I can't sell that heat to the neighbor.
Nope.
If I just put it in a manifold, in a hydronic manifold, and pull the heat out, I could run an insulated line underground. And, you go to these old military bases, that's how they heated the bases, was with the central boiler unit. And granted, the boilers got a lot hotter and it was steam they're moving around. You can still move heat.
Yeah.
And so you can sell heat as a product, is what I'm getting at. And that's what you're doing essentially, with heat offset. You're basically making money on the heat.
It's absolutely incredible. I got one more question for you. We ask this question to everybody, and we like to get a wide range of answers. So, just off the cuff, what's your answer? What does Bitcoin mean to you?
What does Bitcoin mean to me? I would say liberty.
Can you expand upon that a little?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's truly free unless they control their own resources, right?
Right.
I mean, pretty much everything in our life is controlled in some way. You buy a house, you got to pay taxes. Not to say I don't pay tax on my Bitcoin. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that I have control over my wealth. And I'm not just putting it in a bank where they give me an IOU and say, not that I don't have any money in the bank. I'm not saying that. But everybody needs to diversify. Whether, silver, gold, or great, whatever. Firearms, real good solid resources that you can use, like tools, having water. I think all those things are great. But in terms of holding irrefutable property that, I'd go down and get a gold coin from the coin shop. How do I know that someone hasn't shaved a little bit off of it? Well, I could look at it, see if it's mint, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw a headline where the Chinese bought a bunch of gold from Australia, and instead of being 99.9% pure, it was 99.98%. And they had bought so much gold that it was like $100 million. It was like a ridiculous amount of money that they got shorted because it wasn't as pure as they said.
Right.
So I think there's just a lot to be said in terms of personal liberty for holding your own wealth that you control and that you're responsible for. So
that's
I think
a great answer.
What kind of drew me to Bitcoin, I think.
I think that a lot of people will resonate with that. I personally resonate with that. Bitcoin entered my life, and before Bitcoin, I didn't really have ambitions. I didn't really look towards the future. I didn't really care, and maybe that led to my depression at the time. Maybe that's kind of what made me feel hopeless and out of touch with reality. But then Bitcoin comes into my life, and all of a sudden I have the power to do what I want to do. And I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to do malicious things. I'm just trying to live my life.
Yeah.
And now
exactly.
I have the ability to do that. So
Yeah,
it is that freedom.
And not only that, but it's got a secondary pressure on people where it kind of forces you to be more responsible about your own stuff.
Right? And not just about your wealth, but about like your food, your education, like the way that you treat other people.
Yeah.
So I love it, man. This was a great conversation. I definitely learned a lot. I want to stay in touch with you just because I want to start playing around with these systems, and I think that my audience will find it very valuable. So I appreciate your time today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Trevor. Appreciate it.
So one last little bit of stuff we got to do. So I am giving you 2 free tickets to our mining conference in September. It's the Mining Conference by Scott's Crypto Mining.
Cool.
We'd love it if you could come out. It's in Brainerd, Minnesota. Brainerd. Minnesota. Brainerd, Minnesota. I don't know why I just.
Where do you live at, Trevor?
So I'm in Oregon, over on the coast. But
okay, so you're not too far from me then.
Oh no, not at all, man. It'd be awesome to get to come up and see your systems and hang out. But yeah, if you have the ability to in September 27th through the 29th, come out to Brainerd, come and show off your systems or something like that. We can talk about the details more in the after conversation, but we definitely want to see you. We want to have a conversation, have everybody meet you. It's going to be a great time. There's, kayaking, camping, canoeing, all kinds of things that you can do in Brainerd. It's a beautiful place to be. It's family oriented, and we'd love to see you there. Okay.
Yeah, I'll see what's going on. I may be able to come out there.
Yeah, if you're not able to come out, what we're asking is that, maybe you could give away some tickets on your social media, or, if you go to meetups or anything like that, just, give them away to somebody else who really does want to come out. We want to fill this conference up with as many Bitcoiners, Bitcoin miners who are just excited about the space. So,
okay.
Awesome. Well, that's the show, guys. That was the Build a Mine podcast. We were here with Cade. It was great. I hope you guys learned something. I definitely learned something. So please, if you liked it, like, comment, share on whatever podcast sharing platform you're using. We definitely want you to hit up Fountain, because Fountain is the value for value sharing app. And if you hit me up over there, I'll send you some sats. So thank you guys for being here. This was the Build a Mine podcast. Take care.
Please note, the Build a Mine podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mine podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.